My name is Knightley. I've spent years walking through museums, reading declassified reports, and standing in places where history once roared with explosions, now silent. And one thing has always haunted me. What happens to weapons after the war ends? Not during the war, not at their peak, but after the fighting stops. Today's story is about a weapon most people have never heard of. Yet it changed naval warfare forever. The HS-293, the world's first operational guided glide bomb. Historians like Dr. Rolf Dieter Müller have called it the moment precision warfare truly began. Allied intelligence officers who faced it described it as unnerving, because for the first time, a bomb could think at least a little after being released. So ask yourself, what happens when a weapon designed to hunt ships suddenly has no war left to fight? Who claimed it? Who studied it? And who erased it? The HS-293 didn't just disappear when Germany surrendered. According to post-war witnesses and engineers, its real journey began after the smoke cleared. In this documentary, I invite you to walk with me through its full life cycle, from its birth in desperation to its terrifying debut, to the quiet, bureaucratic, often secretive decisions that determined its fate. This isn't just a story about a bomb. It's about how technology outlives ideology, and how yesterday's weapons become tomorrow's doctrine. So stay with me. Let's open the archives, and let's uncover what really happened to HS-293, the world's first guided glide bomb. The rise and legacy of HS-293, the world's first guided glide bomb, the birth of a legend. Before we can understand what happened to the HS-293 after the war, we must understand why it mattered so much while the war was still raging. No weapon leaves history quietly unless it failed completely. The HS-293 did the opposite. It changed the rules. By 1940, Nazi Germany faced a strategic nightmare. The Kriegsmarine was outmatched. The Luftwaffe could strike ships, but traditional bombing was crude and unreliable. Hitting a moving naval target from high altitude was mostly luck. Dive bombers were accurate, but they were slow, exposed, and easy targets for shipboard anti-aircraft fire. Torpedoes required low-altitude, straight-line approaches, essentially suicide runs. German military planners wanted something different, a weapon that could hit ships from a safe distance. That demand led engineers at Henschel Flugzeugwerk to an idea that sounded almost impossible at the time, a bomb that could be guided after release. The HS-293 was born from this requirement. Officially designated Henschel HS-293, it was not a missile in the modern sense, but it was far more than a bomb. It combined three revolutionary ideas into one weapon: glide wings to extend range, a rocket booster to gain speed after release, radio command guidance, controlled by a human operator. The original purpose was clear and narrow: anti-ship warfare, especially against lightly armored vessels such as destroyers, transports, and escort ships. It was not designed to penetrate heavy battleship armor like the Fritz X. Instead, the HS-293 was a hunter meant to cripple fleets by targeting the ships that kept them moving. Development accelerated rapidly between 1941 and 1943. Germany's political leadership pushed for wonder weapons to offset Allied industrial superiority. The HS-293 fit perfectly into this mindset: cheaper than a new aircraft, reusable concepts, and terrifying in theory. But it was not magic. Engineering strengths included standoff range beyond most ship defenses, human-in-the-loop control, allowing course correction, relatively simple construction compared to later missiles. Its weaknesses were just as real. Required clear line of sight, depended on operator skill, vulnerable to electronic interference, limited effectiveness in bad weather or smoke. Still, for its time, it was decades ahead of existing naval weapons. First combat deployments. The HS-293 first appeared in combat in 1943, and its arrival shocked Allied forces. Sailors reported seeing bombs that did not fall straight down, but curved, adjusted, and chased their ships. Some described them as flying torpedoes. Others thought Germany had developed autonomous weapons, which was not true, but fear doesn't care about technical accuracy. In its earliest deployments, the Allies had no effective countermeasures. German bomber crews released the HS-293 from medium altitude. Once the rocket ignited, the bomb accelerated, then transitioned into a glide. The operator, watching a flare at the tail, guided it using a joystick, correcting for ship maneuvers. The psychological impact was immediate and severe. Ships zigzagged violently. Gunners fired blindly. Crews lost confidence in traditional defenses. British naval intelligence reports from 1943 describe confusion and panic during initial encounters. The idea that a bomb could be steered shattered assumptions about air attacks. However, combat reality quickly exposed limitations. Operators required training and calm under fire. If the launching aircraft was driven off, the bomb was lost. Smoke screens, evasive maneuvers, and eventually radio jamming reduced effectiveness. But damage had already been done, conceptually. Peak influence. The HS-293 reached its peak influence, not because it was unstoppable, but because it proved something crucial. Precision-guided weapons were possible. By late 1943 and early 1944, Allied convoys adjusted tactics. Electronic warfare units focused on jamming. Escort ships prioritized disrupting guidance aircraft. Even as its kill rate declined, the HS-293 forced the Allies to spend resources countering a weapon that was relatively cheap to produce. It became iconic for several reasons. It was one of the first operational guided weapons. It changed naval air combat doctrine. It exposed the future of warfare, control, not mass milestones included. First confirmed guided anti-ship strikes. First widespread use of radio command weapons in combat. Direct influence on post-war missile thinking. Historians later noted that the HS-293 mattered less for what it sank and more for what it inspired. Collapse of the old world. By 1944, Germany's situation deteriorated rapidly. Fuel shortages, limited bomber sorties, production facilities were bombed. Allied electronic countermeasures became increasingly effective. Operators struggled against jamming signals that broke guidance links. The HS-293 did not fail because the idea was flawed. It failed because Germany ran out of time. As the war neared its end, production slowed, deployment became sporadic. Strategic priorities shifted to survival. Then came 1945. Airfields were abandoned, factories fell silent. Crates of HS-293 components sat untouched in hangars, bunkers, and forests. And then suddenly, it was over. The war ended. The battlefield went silent. But the story of HS-293, the world's first guided glide bomb, had only begun. The war ends, the fate of HS-293. When the Second World War ended in Europe in May 1945, the silence did not arrive cleanly. It settled over wrecked cities, burning factories, and shattered airfields, littered with the debris of a collapsed military machine. For weapons like the HS-293, the end of combat was not an ending at all. It was a moment of dangerous uncertainty. The bomb that once terrorized Allied ships was now just another object scattered across a defeated nation. But to the victors, it was not junk. It was knowledge. Chaos of surrender and seizure. Germany's surrender created chaos on an industrial scale. Luftwaffe bases were abandoned in haste. Engineers fled or were captured. Supply depots were left unlocked. In this confusion, HS-293 units were found in places no one expected. Allied troops discovered completed HS-293 bombs stacked in hangars, crates of wings, guidance components, and rocket boosters, half-assembled units on factory floors. Training models and inert versions used for instruction. Some were found at former bomber bases in Germany and occupied France. Others turned up in coastal facilities that had once supported anti-shipping operations. A few were reportedly dumped or hidden as retreating units tried to deny technology to the advancing enemy. For the soldiers who encountered them, reactions varied. Infantrymen often had no idea what they were looking at, odd-shaped bombs with wings, wires, and unfamiliar electronics. Intelligence officers, however, recognized their importance immediately. Captured German technicians were interrogated. Manuals were seized. Test footage and training films were collected. Every piece of information mattered. The HS-293, once deployed in secrecy, now lay exposed. The power vacuum. The end of the war created a power vacuum unlike anything Europe had seen. Entire arsenals belonged to no one and everyone. The question facing the Allies was simple, but the answer was not. What should we do with all this enemy technology? Official policy often called for rapid demilitarization. Weapons were to be destroyed, factories dismantled, and production halted. On paper, the HS-293 was just another banned weapon. In reality, things were very different. The United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom were already suspicious of one another. Cooperation during the war did not erase competition afterward. Every advanced weapon became a potential advantage in a coming conflict no one publicly acknowledged. Some HS-293 units were marked for scrapping, others were quietly diverted. This dual-track approach defined the immediate post-war period. Public destruction, private collection. Trucks moved at night. Crates were relabeled. Entire shipments vanished into technical evaluation programs. The HS-293 was no longer a weapon of Germany. It was a prize. Technology race begins. Within weeks of the surrender, engineers and scientists from Allied nations began dismantling HS-293 units with obsessive precision. They were not interested in using the bomb as is. They wanted to understand how radio commands were transmitted and received, how stable glide was maintained, how human operators interacted with moving targets, where the design failed and why. In the United States, captured HS-293 components were shipped to test facilities and research centers. Engineers compared them with American experimental glide bombs. The conclusions were sobering. Germany had been ahead in practical deployment, even if the technology was still crude. The Soviet Union took a similar approach, but with a different philosophy. Entire systems were copied, modified, and integrated into early missile research. The idea of guiding a weapon after release fit perfectly into Soviet post-war military thinking. British engineers focused heavily on countermeasures. Having faced HS-293 attacks at sea, they were determined to ensure that such a threat would never again catch them unprepared. Jamming, signal disruption, and electronic defense became priorities. In all cases, the HS-293 acted as a teaching tool. What had once been a weapon of war was now a lesson plan. From battlefield tool to blueprint, one of the most important changes after the war was conceptual. During combat, the HS-293 was judged by what it destroyed. After the war, it was judged by what it represented. It proved weapons could be guided remotely. Accuracy could replace mass. Electronics would shape future warfare. This realization accelerated the early Cold War arms race. The HS-293 did not directly become a post-war weapon, but its DNA appeared everywhere. Early anti-ship missiles, guided air-to-surface munitions, remote control, and later autonomous systems. The bomb's flaws were just as valuable as its successes. Engineers learned what not to do. Over-reliance on line-of-sight control. Vulnerability to jamming. Operator fatigue and error. These lessons shaped the next generation of weapons far more than the HS-293 ever could have in combat. The human factor. The fate of the HS-293 was also tied to the fate of the people who built it. German engineers faced stark choices: cooperation in exchange for protection, silence and obscurity, or prosecution under denazification programs. Some were recruited into Allied research projects, others disappeared into civilian life. A few watched their life's work dismantled, shipped abroad, or melted down. For them, the HS-293 was no longer a symbol of innovation, it was evidence. Weapon without a war. By late 1945, the HS-293 had lost its identity as a German weapon. It existed only as scrap metal, test data, museum curiosity, classified reference. Yet its influence was spreading quietly. The war was over. But the technological struggle had just begun. And in that struggle, HS-293, the world's first guided glide bomb, found a second life. No longer on the battlefield, but in the laboratories, doctrines, and ambitions of a divided world. Where did they all go? The post-war disappearance of HS-293 the world's first guided glide bomb. When people imagine the end of a war, they picture parades, surrender ceremonies, and the lowering of flags. What they rarely imagine is the administrative aftershock. The quiet, ruthless process that determines the fate of millions of tons of military hardware. For the HS-293, this was the moment when its numbers collapsed from hundreds to a handful. Not through combat, but through decisions made in offices, factories, and closed-door meetings. So where did they all go? The answer is not a single path, but many. Some public, some secret, some still unresolved. Scrapped for resources. The most common fate of the HS-293 was also the least dramatic. It was scrapped. Post-war Europe was starving for raw materials. Railways needed rebuilding. Bridges had to be reinforced. Factories had to be restarted. Steel was not just valuable. It was essential for survival. Weapons were not sentimental objects. They were material stockpiles. The HS-293, with its steel body, aluminum wings, and copper wiring, was an ideal candidate for recycling. In many regions, Allied authorities issued blanket orders. Destroy unused weapons, strip reusable components, melt down metal for civilian reconstruction. Entire storage depots of HS-293 units were dismantled in weeks. Wings were cut off, guidance units removed, bomb bodies loaded onto railcars headed for smelters. There was no ceremony, no documentation beyond inventory numbers crossed out in ledgers. Many HS-293 bombs did not survive even a single year after the war. They were transformed into railway tracks, structural beams, industrial tools, construction materials for housing. In a cruel irony, parts of a weapon designed to sink ships may still exist today, embedded in bridges, factories, or homes, completely unrecognizable. This was the fate of most HS-293 units. Captured by major Allied powers, not all HS-293 bombs were destroyed. The most intact and technically interesting examples were claimed by the victorious powers, each with their own priorities. United States American forces systematically collected advanced German weapons under specialized exploitation programs. HS-293 units were shipped to the United States along with documentation, components, and sometimes the engineers who understood them. In American hands, the HS-293 became a test subject. Engineers disassembled it to study. Radio command systems, aerodynamic stability, human-guided control under combat conditions. While the US did not adopt the HS-293 directly, its influence can be seen in early American guided bomb and missile experiments. The lesson was clear. Guidance was not a novelty, it was the future. Soviet Union. The Soviet approach was more direct. HS-293 units captured by Red Army forces were transported east. There, they were studied, copied, and modified. Soviet engineers were less concerned with originality and more focused on function. Elements of HS-293 design philosophy, particularly manual guidance, and glide efficiency fed into early Soviet anti-ship and air-to-surface weapon research. United Kingdom Britain had faced HS-293 attacks firsthand. As a result, British post-war efforts focused heavily on understanding vulnerabilities, improving electronic countermeasures, developing defensive doctrine. Captured units were tested not just to learn how they worked, but how to stop weapons like them. France and others. France, rebuilding its military and industry, studied HS-293 units as part of broader rearmament efforts. Smaller Allied nations such as Canada, Poland, and Czechoslovakia examined captured examples for training and technical education. In all cases, the HS-293 was no longer a weapon, it was a teaching device. Secret programs. Some HS-293 units did not enter public research pipelines at all. They vanished. During the early Cold War, secrecy became routine. Advanced enemy technology was moved to closed test ranges, restricted laboratories, facilities that never appeared on public maps. In these places, HS-293 units were modified, tested under controlled conditions, compared with domestic prototypes. Records from these programs were often classified or destroyed. What remains are fragments, references in reports, coded designations, unexplained transfers. This disappearance fueled speculation. Did some HS-293 units serve as templates for weapons never publicly acknowledged? Were they used in live-fire tests that were never disclosed? The truth is likely fragmented across archives in multiple countries, still sealed. Museum preservation. Only a tiny fraction of HS-293 bombs survived in recognizable form. Museums acquired them through military transfers, donations from storage depots, recovery from testing grounds. Preservation was difficult. The HS-293 was never designed to last decades. Its electronics degraded, wiring corroded, rocket components became unstable or unusable. Restoration often required reconstruction rather than repair. Some museums chose not to fully restore them, leaving corrosion visible, a deliberate choice to emphasize age and fragility. Today, these surviving examples serve as rare physical proof that the weapon existed at all. Battlefield relics and abandoned survivors. Finally, there are the lost ones, not scrapped, not captured, not catalogued. Some HS-293 units were dumped during retreats, abandoned at airfields, lost in transport accidents. Others may lie, buried in forests, sunk offshore, hidden beneath collapsed structures. Occasionally, remnants surface, a rusted wing, a fragment of guidance housing, a corroded control cable. Sometimes hikers or construction crews stumble upon them, silent corpses of a war that ended decades ago. These relics are dangerous, unstable, and often destroyed once discovered. But for a brief moment, they remind us that not all history is preserved neatly in museums. Some of it waits forgotten, buried, and incomplete. The Vanishing Act. By the early 1950s, the HS-293 had almost completely disappeared from public view. Not because it was insignificant, but because it was too important to remember openly. Its ideas lived on, its metal was reused, its lessons were absorbed. And so the question, where did they all go, has no single answer. They went everywhere, and nowhere at all. Impact on the post-war world. How HS-293, the world's first guided glide bomb, shaped the future. When the war ended, the HS-293 disappeared from the skies. But its influence did not disappear with it. Unlike tanks or rifles that became obsolete almost overnight, the HS-293 belonged to a different category of weapon. It was not defined by raw firepower, but by an idea. And ideas are far harder to destroy. The post-war world absorbed the HS-293 quietly, often without public acknowledgement. But its impact spread through military doctrine, psychology, culture, and global politics. Influence on new military technology. The most direct legacy of the HS-293 was technological. Before World War II, air-delivered weapons followed simple logic, release, and hope. The HS-293 shattered that logic by proving that control after release was not only possible, but practical in combat. This realization became foundational in the early Cold War. Precision over mass military planners on both sides of the Iron Curtain learned the same lesson. It was no longer necessary to overwhelm a target with numbers if accuracy could be improved. The HS-293 demonstrated that a single guided weapon could threaten a high-value target. Aircraft no longer needed to fly directly over enemy defenses. Electronics would become as important as explosives. These ideas fed directly into the development of early anti-ship missiles, air-to-surface guided munitions, standoff weapons designed to protect the launch platform. While post-war weapons quickly surpassed the HS-293 in sophistication, they inherited its core philosophy: guidance as a battlefield discipline. The HS-293 also forced militaries to treat guidance itself as a discipline. Engineers began asking new questions. How reliable must control links be? How much autonomy should a weapon have? How vulnerable are guidance systems to interference? The bomb's weaknesses, particularly its susceptibility to jamming, were just as valuable as its successes. They pushed nations to develop more secure communication methods, improved signal processing, redundant control systems. By the 1950s and 1960s, these lessons influenced missile guidance, drone control, and eventually satellite-assisted navigation. In this sense, the HS-293 became an ancestor not only of missiles, but of remote warfare itself. Psychological and cultural impact. The HS-293 left a deep psychological imprint, especially among those who encountered it firsthand. Veterans and memory. Allied sailors who survived HS-293 attacks often remembered them with a unique sense of unease. Traditional air attacks followed predictable patterns. The HS-293 did not. It seemed to hunt. Veterans described the feeling of watching a bomb adjust its path, knowing that evasion might not be enough. Even years later, these memories shaped how naval personnel thought about vulnerability and defense. For German engineers and operators, the weapon carried a different psychological weight. It represented technical brilliance under a collapsing regime, a reminder that innovation does not exist in a moral vacuum. Public perception. After the war, in the immediate post-war years, the HS-293 faded from public awareness. Unlike rockets or jet aircraft, it lacked dramatic imagery. There were no parades celebrating it, no iconic silhouettes burned into popular memory. But among specialists, it became legendary. Books, military journals, and later documentaries referenced it as a precursor to modern guided weapons, a warning about technological escalation, an example of how war accelerates innovation. As technology advanced, the HS-293 gained a second life in popular culture, appearing in historical documentaries, referenced in military strategy discussions, inspiring mechanics in war-themed games and simulations. Often unnamed, its influence was still present, the idea that weapons could be guided, adjusted, and controlled in real time. Political effects. The political legacy of the HS-293 was subtle but powerful for defeated nations. In post-war Germany, weapons like the HS-293 became symbols of a dangerous past. They were rarely celebrated and often deliberately forgotten. Public discussion focused on rebuilding, not on technological achievements tied to destruction. Many engineers who worked on such weapons distanced themselves from their wartime projects, emphasizing civilian applications of their skills. The HS-293 thus became part of a broader silence acknowledged in archives, but rarely in public discourse. For the victorious powers, the HS-293 was a propaganda asset, but a quiet one. It demonstrated Allied superiority in defeating advanced weapons, the inevitability of technological progress, the justification for continued military research. Rather than showcasing captured HS-293 bombs publicly, many nations used the knowledge gained from them to justify funding new weapons programs. The message was implicit. If this was possible in 1943, imagine what is possible now. Influence on diplomacy and doctrine. As guided weapons proliferated, they reshaped diplomacy. Nations became more cautious about naval deployments. High-value ships were no longer safe simply because of distance. This vulnerability influenced arms control discussions, naval strategy, the balance of power at sea. The HS-293 had helped introduce a world where technology could negate traditional advantages, a theme that defined Cold War geopolitics. The lingering presence. The war had ended, but the presence of HS-293, the world's first guided glide bomb, lingered. Not as a weapon on display, but as a concept embedded in military thinking. It shaped how wars were planned, how ships were defended, and how nations imagined the future of conflict. Long after its engines stopped and its metal was recycled, its influence continued, quiet, persistent, and unavoidable. In the post-war world, the HS-293 did not survive as an object. It survived as an idea that changed everything. Conclusion: the silence. After the weapon war machines are built for one purpose: destruction. They are designed to be used, consumed, and ultimately replaced. Yet some weapons refuse to vanish when the fighting ends. They linger, not in service but in memory, doctrine, and consequence. The story of HS-293, the world's first guided glide bomb, is one of those rare cases. It did not win the war. It did not change the outcome of history. But it changed how history would be fought. When the HS-293 first took to the air, it carried more than explosives. It carried a new idea, one that would outlive the regime that created it. The idea that a weapon could be guided, corrected, and controlled after release. That destruction no longer depended on chance alone. And once that idea existed, it could never be unlearned. After the war, the HS-293 was dismantled piece by piece. Some units were scrapped, others were studied. A few were hidden away, preserved unintentionally by bureaucracy or neglect. But the most important part, the concept spread quietly across borders, laboratories, and generations. Steel was melted down, wires corroded, electronics failed. But the logic survived. The post-war world absorbed the HS-293 without ceremony. There were no victory speeches about it, no monuments raised in its name. Instead, it became part of the foundation upon which modern precision warfare was built. Every guided missile, every standoff weapon, every remotely controlled strike carries a faint echo of that early experiment. The HS-293 reminds us that technological progress does not ask permission. It emerges under pressure, often in the darkest circumstances, and then reshapes the future long after the original conflict is forgotten. It also forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Innovation is morally neutral. The same ingenuity that builds can also destroy. The same brilliance that advances science can accelerate violence. The HS-293 was neither evil nor heroic. It was a tool, born from desperation shaped by human choices. And that is what makes its story worth telling. As I walk through museums, abandoned airfields, and forgotten roads, I'm reminded that history does not end when the last shot is fired. It continues in quieter ways through repurposed materials, inherited ideas, and unanswered questions. I've stood in hangars where guided bombs once rested, now empty except for dust and shadows. I've seen fragments behind glass, labeled carefully, stripped of danger but heavy with meaning. And every time I'm struck by the same realization. Every relic has a voice, not a loud one, not a dramatic one, but a voice that asks us to listen. The HS-293 speaks of a moment when warfare crossed a threshold. When control replaced chaos. When distance no longer guaranteed safety. When the human hand reached out across the sky to guide destruction with precision. It also speaks of endings, of engineers watching their work dismantled, of soldiers encountering strange machines after surrender, of weapons losing their purpose overnight, and in that ending, there is something deeply human. Because war does not only destroy cities and lives, it creates legacies that must be handled, understood, and sometimes buried. The fate of the HS-293 after the war reflects how societies deal with dangerous knowledge, cautiously, selectively, and often in silence. Some questions remain unanswered. How many units were truly destroyed? How many were absorbed into classified programs? How many still lie buried or submerged, waiting to be found? Those gaps are not failures of history. They are reminders that the past is never fully contained. Pieces slip through the cracks, stories remain incomplete, and perhaps that is appropriate. The HS-293 was designed to surprise, to arrive without warning, to change direction mid-flight. Its post-war fate mirrors that nature fragmented, elusive, and partially hidden. This is why I tell these stories, not to glorify weapons, not to celebrate destruction, but to understand how we arrived where we are. Because every machine, no matter how destructive, teaches us something about who we were, what we feared, and what we believed was necessary at the time. The HS-293 teaches us that the line between past and present is thinner than we think. That modern warfare did not appear suddenly, it evolved step by step, idea by idea, often in secrecy. If we ignore these origins, we risk misunderstanding the world we live in today. So, if you want to continue this journey with me through forgotten bunkers, lost prototypes, abandoned test ranges, and the silent bones of history, stay with me. There are countless echoes of war still waiting to be explored. Stories buried beneath rust, paperwork, and time. And each one matters, not because of what it destroyed, but because of what it reveals. Thank you for walking this path with me. Thank you for listening. And now I'll leave you with a question. What forgotten weapon, project, or machine should we uncover next? Tell me in the comments.